there's quite a strong barrier to entry in the sense that, like, if you look at the clinical research associate role on LinkedIn, the sort of minimum requirement is to have 2 years monitoring experience.
So to be a CRA, you need to have 2 years of being a CRA.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A lot of disease pathologies aren't really just binary, so you definitely do need like a multimodal approach.
Hey guys, it's Charles and welcome to Chat GCP, a medical science, clinical research and commercialization podcast. On today's episode, we have Cameron Quilter. Cameron is a good friend of mine, a CRA for Novotech. So we're going to talk about all things clinical research, getting into the industry, making the most of your time in clinical research, and also some forward-thinking perspectives. So, Cameron, welcome to Chat GCP.
Thanks, Charles. It's great to be here.
Nice one. Hey, so I've had one person on prior to you who's worked in clinical research, and we started the conversation talking about how clinical research is not the obvious career choice to get into, especially if you do your scientific studies in New Zealand.
Right.
I think that's changing a little bit, but it's not like, I'm doing a BSc, I'm going to go get into clinical research. You don't hear about it. There's not like postgraduate studies that you can do specifically. There are some that touch on it. But I was curious, what got you into a clinical research career?
Right. Okay. Well, I'll just provide a bit of background in terms of my tertiary education. I started off down in Dunedin. I completed a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry, and then I made my way back up to Auckland to complete a Masters of Bioscience Enterprise, so which was a sort of degree that you also completed. But bridging business and science, which was great, but still didn't provide me with any clear direction as to what I wanted to do. And I guess that led to me reaching out to a recruitment firm called Salt Recruitment. And essentially they placed me at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, which was my first job within the sort of the healthcare industry. My role was as a regulatory affairs associate, and I worked in the international sales team, providing support to the regulatory managers there. And my job was essentially assisting them with pulling together sort of product medical device packages for sort of product renewals and registrations. And thereafter, once I finished up at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, I moved on to AFT Pharmaceuticals, and I was also part of the international regulatory affairs team. I wasn't entirely sure whether or not I wanted to stay within regulatory affairs.
I was going to say, it's not the most illustrious of areas to be in.
It's a very siloed line of work. In terms of, you don't really have much external interaction. More so, you may work with, you do work with a lot of regulatory agencies, but a lot of that interaction is just via email. So I was very much so open to sort of other opportunities within the sort of the healthcare industry, and that's when clinical research came on my radar. So a good friend of ours, Luke, he had actually pivoted away from, I was working with him at the time and we were in the same international regulatory affairs team, and he pivoted and moved to Novotech, at which point he said, hey, look, there's this role known as clinical research associate, and you get to work with these cool investigational products. And no 2 days are the same, and I thought to myself, great, that sounds awesome. I'll jump right onto that. So he thereafter sort of referred me, and I interviewed and got the role as a clinical research associate at Novotech. And
nice.
So I sort of, I guess, fell into the role as
That seems to be the most common response that I get when I ask people who work in clinical research, how did you get there? And I think maybe 9 times out of 10 it is, I just fell in. I had an interest in science, had an interest in medical sciences. Maybe I did a medical degree or a biological sciences degree, but just fell in, had no intention. It's quite interesting. When it's such a diverse career, like there are so many different roles that you can have within that career, you'd think there'd be a bit more of a funnel to get there. But no, you kind of have to know someone that can get you in
For
to
sure.
the role. Yeah.
I think there's quite a strong barrier to entry in the sense that, like, if you look at the clinical research associate role on LinkedIn or through Seek, the sort of minimum requirement is to have 2 years of monitoring experience, and that's difficult to.
So to be a CRA, you need to have 2 years of being a CRA.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how are you supposed to amass that experience without actually being given the opportunity? And that's where your network sort of comes into play. I mean, not so much lately, but historically speaking, a lot of CROs have provided CRA 1 sort of development program, which is like a 3-month crash course, and it's what I went through when I first joined Novotech. And I guess that's probably sort of the best way to run into the role without first having any exposure to the clinical trials industry. I guess in regulatory affairs, that's very much so sort of post-investigation. That's when you're pulling together all your clinical research and then you're presenting it to a regulatory authority for approval. Where else, I guess, the clinical research side of things, sort of site management and...
Yeah, you've went from one end of the spectrum to the end, right? So you've gone from the final, putting it all together, submitting it, hoping to get approval from the FDA or whoever it is, to, we've got this new drug, let's test it in some willing participants.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm a firm believer of, with any industry, I mean, clinical research is not unique, but the network effect's really important. I think since COVID, we've kind of all been relegated to our houses. Working from home is so much more normal now, and networking has kind of taken a hit. And I don't think that might be really helpful for individual businesses that want their employees cranking out widgets, in the comfort of their homes and not having to, commute and engage all of that friction. But I don't think it's good for people long term because you miss out on those network effects. You're not like out there looking for different things or seeing different things or bumping into people the way you would be if you're actually on site, or going out to events or industry type things. So that was your experience was pivoting from regulatory affairs, falling into clinical research, getting that CRA development program to give you the toolkit so you could go out and be a CRA. But why don't we take a step back and go, what does that toolkit look like and what does a CRA do?
All right. Toolkit-wise, I'd say sort of the main skill is attention to detail. I guess for a lot of people that comes quite naturally. For myself, I'd say it's something that I've developed through my time working as a regulatory affairs associate, and even now within sort of clinical affairs. But the way that, I mean, like within this industry, we do have a lot of SOP, so there's a lot of directive in terms of what's expected of you when you're on site, and when you're implementing the job, and that's something that you should always refer to. So again, a very sort of like a checklist approach is how I'd explain it.
Because the whole industry is very regulated.
That is,
and a clinical trial, obviously, you need to follow internationally accepted guidelines and local requirements and regulatory requirements and practices. You're not like, oh, hey, little Johnny, do you want to test this drug for me? Great. All right, bye-bye. So there's there's so many different layers. And to get things done correctly, you do. That's why a CRO, or clinical contract research organization, exists. Why the CRA role exists is to make sure that the people that are administering a new drug or treatment do follow the right requirements, whether it be ethical or regulatory. So the CRA role is kind of like you mentioned a checklist approach, but it's really to make sure that those requirements, ethical and regulatory, are met and are sound.
And that's just so again, that's just to ensure that the patient safety is upheld. across the board, as well as the fact that the quality and integrity of the data that is produced is in line with ICH GCP, as well as with whichever regulatory authority will be reviewing your clinical package at the time of submission. Yeah.
So a day-to-day role, Luke mentioned to you that no 2 days are the same.
Right.
You might be traveling up and down the country, visiting different places, writing reports.
Right. Yeah. So we sort of, I guess, for each study we sort of operate by a clinical monitoring plan. So that sort of helps me outline as to which days I'll have on site. So typically speaking, depending whether or not it's a phase 1 normal healthy volunteer or like a phase 2, phase 3 sort of patient-centric study, for the phase 1s, you're probably on site every 2 weeks, whereas for the sort of phase 2, phase 3s, you're on site possibly every 4 to 6 weeks, if not longer. And around that, when we're on site, what we're doing is we're reviewing, the informed consents, eligibilities first and foremost, and then every sort of sequential visit thereafter, as outlined in your study protocol. And we're making sure that sort of everything's kosher. And if we do find that there's any deviations, we sort of bring it up to our study coordinators and sort of put corrective and preventative actions in place to sort of mitigate the reoccurrence of those deviations. And that's all in the name of, again, ensuring the data that's produced is as clean as possible, and also that, the patients are safe.
Yeah. So for you, the way I see it, there are 2 types of CRAs.
Right.
There are career CRAs and there are temporary CRAs.
Right.
So the CRAs that really enjoy it and want to do it forever, those are the people that, still in their 50s, are in their 50s and still doing a CRA. Or those that, spend a few years, 4 or 5, and move on to something else. Is that, which camp do you find yourself in?
It's a hard-hitting question. I'd say I love the CRA role, but I won't be calling it home forever. It's quite a demanding role in the sense that you're sort of juggling so many tasks at once, and burnout, especially within sort of like a clinical research organisation, is quite common on the basis that you're sort of juggling so many studies at once. So for me, I think I definitely see myself in the role for the next 5 years, and that's sort of just to further develop my skills, greater understanding and appreciation for the process, and also get a bit more sort of exposure to the different therapeutic areas that are available. Thereafter, I think for me, I probably want to move into business development. But in order for me to do that, again, I have to understand the product, and the product is the services that sort of a clinical research organisation can provide, and the best way to really understand that is by being in the role itself. So
definitely, I think we've all worked for like project managers or business development folks that haven't spent those time on the tools, so to speak. Being a CRA, in and out of sites, in and out of planes. For different studies, for different therapeutic areas, managing different aspects, and having so many different hats, which is just by virtue of the role what you have to do. So, I commend you for that, because, when you have a project manager or someone above you that doesn't know what a CRA does, it just doesn't translate, and it can cause a lot of issues down the line, right? So business development. So at like a CRO style business development role, or pharma?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say initially, I'd like to work within business development for a CRO. I think for me, it's more so the exposure to the sort of the clinical phase biopharmaceutical industry is something that's quite appealing to me. And being able to work with those companies to develop their molecules, or further the development of those molecules, sort of like in a timely manner, with like a quality approach, is something that is quite appealing to me.
Yeah. Because New Zealand, I've had a number of people in not like a CRA role on the podcast, but a couple of phase 1 investigators.
Right.
And that's where kind of New Zealand's niche is. Obviously, there is later phase research and now bigger hospitals, and we need that because, as we all know, access to modern drugs in New Zealand is not great by virtue of Pharmac having a very limited budget and a very old school way of ranking where they're going to put their money towards. But the real sweet spot or the real expertise seems to be developing in that early phase part of the life cycle. So you've got your normal healthy volunteers and then your maybe first in patient studies or your early smaller dose ranging phase 2A studies as well, which I think is great because there's a real opportunity to bring in a lot of studies from overseas biopharmaceutical companies that have more onerous regulatory requirements for early phase clinical research and bring them to New Zealand. So we get the expertise developed and we get the money, you know? So, I mean, that being in business development, having close ties to like all the pharma companies that are thinking about doing, you know, their clinical research is a cool role. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing you're like long term.
Well, yeah,
what gets you excited?
Yeah, for sure. Initially, and then thereafter, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because
project management never interested you.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I've got no idea. I mean, like ultimately speaking, it's you sort of just grow with the role. I mean, I do have a 5-year plan in place, but you just never know, really.
Yeah.
Again, as you sort of mentioned before, the network effect, you know, may have a pull. A lot of the people that I speak to who are within the industry also may express and may change my opinion in the future, I'm unsure.
Yeah. So that 5-year plan ain't set in stone.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, see how it goes, may be flexible.
Yeah, good stuff. But that's the beauty of, I think, clinical research is that, especially once you're in, you said that the barrier to entry is really high, but once you are in, there is a lot of opportunity there. You might want to go down to the site level. Not saying you particularly, but anyone. Once you're at the site, you could go down to the site level.
For sure.
Sorry, down sounds like it's a step down, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, if we layer it, sponsor, CRO, site.
Yeah.
Or you might go to the sponsor side. That's also, or even within a CRO, there's, you know, like regulatory project management, therapeutic strategy, or business development. You know, you could go back and do some biostats.
Yeah,
into it.
for sure, absolutely. I mean,
Bit of that,
yeah.
Yeah. So, what have been the most interesting, without being like obviously calling out specifics, but what have been the most interesting studies that you've worked on? Is it the early phase stuff, or is it the later phase stuff? Is it new molecular entities of any particular type?
Yeah, I'd definitely say like early phase for me probably be the most interesting.
Mm-hmm. Why is that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's all interesting. We're dealing with, like, irrespective of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. These are still investigational molecules that we're dealing with, and a lot of the drugs that I've worked on are sort of filling either sort of there's no standard of care, or it provides a potential to sort of surpass a standard of care in terms of efficacy. So, I really don't know how to speak into sort of my experiences dealing with these sort of investigational compounds without actually revealing too much. Yeah, because they're definitely leading the market in terms of within these sort of disease indications. But
yeah, I was talking with Rohit Katyal.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so New Zealand Clinical Research, phase 1.
Yeah.
Or early phase, shall we call it, investigator. And he was talking about the CRISPR studies.
Right.
And so they've got quite a few going through their clinical research site.
Yeah.
And New Zealand is starting to get a lot of expertise in CRISPR that simply by virtue of COVID happening and New Zealand being fairly untouched from COVID, so remaining open, clinical trials in CRISPR could come here. And by virtue of that, we've got people working on them, so they're getting expertise, they're getting knowledge while the rest of the world isn't. So there's he was saying that there's a lot more of that coming here. We're kind of now starting to be seen as a bit more of a industry leading location to do that early phase CRISPR stuff. Because it's not early phase stuff, it's first in man. You don't know what you're looking out for if you don't have experience in early phase clinical research, right? Because, going from an animal, testing something in an animal to testing something in man, that's quite a leap.
Oh,
and obviously, you've done your research, your GLP studies, but there's always that's quite a big leap from, say, I don't know, non-human primate or a beagle.
Yeah, right, for sure.
To a man.
I mean, which is why we're quite fortunate to have private institutions like NZCR, right, who specialise specifically in phase 1 trials and have sort of built up that experience over decades, that in-house experience over decades, which is just great for New Zealand as a whole.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's great that we have the regulatory framework. Hopefully that doesn't change anytime soon. That does make it fairly straightforward to get a study up and running in this country. You compare it to places basically anywhere else bar Australia. It is so hard. It is so hard. It's so much more complex. To get a study approved to run by the US FDA, you have to have way more comprehensive package than you would down here. And Europe is probably even more onerous, which I think is great. A huge opportunity for us. And people like us, us as a country, but people like us that get the opportunity to work in this arena is really cool. And getting early access or involvement in these brand new chemical entities.
For sure.
It's really cool.
In addition to that, also cost-wise, a lot of these companies are based in the US and I guess sort of the conversion rate favours them. And especially, it's
even more so now, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And and it's something that's quite important because Novotech historically has worked with a lot of smaller clinical phase biopharmaceuticals without sort of a commercial product. So they're quite constrained in terms of funding. So obviously
they've got no revenue coming in. They've
exactly
just got cash burn.
Exactly, yeah, high cash burn. A lot of they have a high dependency on the capital markets, and they can only raise money once they've hit certain milestones.
Yep.
So yeah, a country like New Zealand's great. We've got again, as you said, flexible regulatory framework. And great currency exchange, so sort of the combination of the two works well. And also, we don't compromise in terms of quality. I'd say we set very high bar.
Yeah, it's funny, right? I mean, isn't the project management triangle cost, quick pace, and quality, and you can only pick two? But New Zealand is the perfect complement of all three. The cost is lower by virtue of our currency and exchange rate. Quality is still good, but pace is there because we don't have these crazy onerous regulatory frameworks. So it's geez, where's the catch? There is none. Or maybe there is, having to work with Cameron. But no, that's cool. So I mean, because I spent some time as a CRA, of course. I did. And I definitely wasn't in the camp of hey, I'm going to do this for 5-10 years at all. I was get me out of here, because it's not for everyone. I think you do need to have a solid understanding of what it means to be a CRA, to be a good project manager, to run projects well. Because unless you have an actual understanding of what the CRAs have to do, wake up at the crack of dawn, get on a plane, fly somewhere, take a cab, work really hard to make, because you might not be there for another 4 to 6 weeks, to get everything done, then fly home. It's a big day, and you might do that 2-3 times in a week. For
sure, everything's a huge time crunch. I mean, that's just one component of the overall job. Although it's the most important component, being on site and sort of reviewing patient binders, we also have to do the administrative work behind that. So, once we've finished this monitoring visit, we now have to capture all our findings in a trip report. We have to file all the documents collected during that monitoring visit, sort of in the trial master file. we sort of have to distribute comms among the team in terms of a bit of like a progress update aside from the trip report, giving sort of insight as to where the site stands, and then after that, I mean, like you have ongoing site management correspondences where you have to make sure that, you know.
I was talking to a friend who was a CRA in Australia, and she I think there was a time where like she didn't spend a night at home more than once in a row for like 3 weeks because she was like flying from like Sydney to Melbourne to Darwin to Perth to Adelaide to Perth and maybe home for a little bit. Yeah. You know, so, and like you say, there's that just because you're not on site doesn't mean you're not working. You still got a lot to do. So I think for me, although I didn't particularly enjoy being a CRA, I'm really glad I did spend a lot of time on the tools, shall we say. Yeah. To understand the role, how being a project manager fits within the wider gambit, but also knowing what my team would be undergoing themselves. You know.
Yeah, for sure. I guess also helped you know which questions to ask, right? After we sort of come from site and you.
Yeah, for sure. I met this project manager the other day, and she was like, "What's a protocol deviation management plan?" And I was like, "How long?"
Only one of the most important
I know
documents to refer to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so monitoring was fun, but project management is more my wheelhouse. But it's quite interesting because you know you meet. I suppose this is not unique to clinical research, but you meet people that are really good subject matter experts that then move into a management role, but they don't change up their operating style or the way they operate. So to be a good CRA, you need to have such fierce attention to detail. Right?
Yeah.
But that fierce attention to detail is not necessarily going to make you a good business development person.
No, I mean, yeah.
You know, or of course everyone needs to have attention to detail, but the level of like, I don't know, a high frequency of like observation is not going to lead you to good, like that's not your main skill set. And same with being a project manager. Like if you,
I guess, so from the perspective of being a business development manager or project manager, is that you're more so dealing with people rather than
individual
sort of source, points. Right? Exactly. So, attention to detail is no longer a core skill, although it is important. Maybe from the perspective of business development, it's important to be attentive to the needs of your client.
Or your team.
Yeah, or your team, and understanding sort of their needs, and whether or not the services that your company provides meets those needs appropriately. You know.
Yeah, for sure. So but project management wasn't for you, eh?
No, I mean, again, it's like undetermined. Maybe you may inspire. Who knows? You may inspire me, Charles. I may choose to pivot at some point.
No, it's a never-ending battle. The job's never done. Yeah, but it's good fun. Like at the moment, I'm across. So I've pivoted from CRO land into biopharma land, which is very, very different. I've actually spent time in both big pharma and semi-startup pharma as well, and I don't think my experience is unique by any measure, but the two worlds could not be more different. You know, like big pharma, obviously they have a very long-standing pedigree. They've had so much time to establish their systems and their hierarchies, and any changes that they make within the organization take 12 to 18 months. You know, so they roll it out really slowly after spending a very long time considering all the options and bringing in countless stakeholders. And you know, if you work for big pharma, you probably have a very small purview over which you see. You know, so like I was working as a regional study manager, so I looked after Asia Pacific. But within each country that I oversaw, I had a country study manager, and then I had multiple like startup personnel and then CRAs. So the scope of my role was just to manage them. Like I wasn't doing any of the technical stuff anymore. So that with a bigger company, you get pulled into a smaller and smaller range of different things. And that lends itself really well to like consistency and quality, because you're like doing the same thing over and over again, you know, and that's great for a big company. You know, you want quality, you want consistency, you want predictability. But with that comes like super high cost. Like you think you have that big a headcount, they're all charging at X amount, that's a big cost. Whereas like the smaller biopharma don't have necessarily the big headcount. They've got to be really careful with their cash. Like you mentioned earlier, if they don't have a commercial product, then that's heavy cash burn. So they try to strip away, you know, everything about the fuselage to make the plane fly kind of thing, you know. So yeah, pivoting to biopharma was like, wow, I'm so glad because I needed a bit more chaos. Like I need a bit more like excitement. I need a bit more intensity, which I just didn't get in big pharma. You know, some people like that predictability, a bit like, you know, some people like being a CRA for 20 years. Some people like the predictability. I kind of like the chaos.
Yeah.
It's a bit more fun and it makes it a bit more exciting.
Well, you probably had a bit of a taste of that chaos when you're working as a CRA, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Problem solving that's required.
Yeah, and you got to have a good attitude because you're the middleman, aren't you, as a CRA, right? Like you're working with the site, but you're also working on behalf of the sponsor, and you're working for the wider team to get something done. So, having those interpersonal skills are like critical.
Yeah.
You got to be liked by everyone, right?
Yeah. The eyes and the ears. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to flash that smile and bat those baby browns.
Yeah. Sure.
Especially with the PI.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what have been some of your like highlights in your career today? Like big wins that you've got on the board that you think you're like, I'm glad that I work in this industry. Like real satisfaction. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely get that every time. So I've been fortunate enough to work in across a few clinical trials now. We've sort of seen them through to, you know, database lock and closeout. And those are always sort of momentous occasions when you sort of work with a team and you get to a point where sort of the data package is ready to be sent off to the stats team and eventually presented in a digestible manner by sort of like an external party, like a regulatory authority. So those are always great moments. Aside from that, I'd say my regulatory affairs, my previous regulatory affairs life, I worked on a product called Maxigesic hot and cold drink, although it's not the most exciting. It's a very effective product. It's a combination of paracetamol and ibuprofen. Yeah, so I helped get that product, I led the registration of that product in Australia and New Zealand. So that was, again, great moment in my career.
Yeah, man. AFT Pharmaceuticals, they've done like, well, Hartley Atkinson, obviously managing director, CEO. One of those really cool success stories for New Zealand, has achieved a lot from, can we say humble beginnings? I think we can, because he started it from his garage with like, I think 50 grand's worth of startup capital back in the early 2000s. And now, you know, it's a very successful, mostly dealing with generics, but also have their own innovative products. It's quite a cool little success story for New Zealand pharma.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like it's a very interesting business model in terms of, as you said, generics. I guess that's how AFT Pharmaceuticals started, and that sort of funded the R&D behind Maxigesic and pushing out that branded product.
It's a cool kind of commercialization model as well, whereby you grow a bit more organically. You know, the revenues fund your R&D to a point. Obviously, they floated as well on the ASX, and that brought in some capital to fund their activities. But that was quite interesting to see that, you know, it was for a very long time, the longest time really was a private company, you know, growing organically, revenues. Okay, let's put some of this into Maxigesic and go from there, as opposed to, you know, like your traditional biopharma company, which would be like spin something out of a university, raise a whole bunch of capital, live vicariously 6 month to 12 month to 18 month increments between capital raises, and hope that your drug works,
Yeah.
after investing 10, 15, $20 million into
Yeah,
it.
definitely not as sustainable,
Yeah. So, I mean, it's quite, it's not as, shall we say, sexy of a story,
All right.
know, but has been very successful regardless.
It has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking personally, are there any particular companies out there that you quite like the science of?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So, there's quite a few biopharma companies out of Australia that will make huge headwinds. They've got a few blockbuster drugs in development, namely Opthia and Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals. So Paradigm, essentially, their lead drug is pentosan polysulfate sodium, which is currently being developed for osteoarthritis. So osteoarthritis, I mean, historically speaking, has been sort of a disease indication treated with sort of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and opioids. So, just painkillers, no disease-modifying drugs. And it's amazing that we sort of haven't made leaps and bounds in osteoarthritis, considering how big the total addressable market is. I mean, it's like a $20 billion market worldwide. So leading back to Paradigm, essentially PPS has been used in animals for the very same indication, osteoarthritis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Rennie, the CEO of Paradigm, obviously thought, if it works in animals, clearly, the non-clinical data is there.
So it was a disease-modifying drug for osteoarthritis in animals, but not for man.
Well, potentially disease-modifying, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're going through sort of the phase 3 trialing of the drug now, and they'll be releasing that data sort of Q2 of 2025.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So could be very big. Opthia, another company. So their drug is sort of specifically targeting wet AMD, so age-related macular degeneration, which is essentially when these patients, their sort of eyes become highly vascularized, and it results in sort of the build-up of an excess of fluid, and their eyesight essentially blurs. What this drug does, so what the standard of care currently does is it inhibits something called VEGF-A, so vascular endothelial growth factor A, which sort of prevents the formation of blood vessels. And what Opthia are doing is they're just taking sort of like a combination approach. So they're specifically inhibiting VEGF-C and D, which are just two other factors. And sort of when you combine the three, it just has a superior effect if you were just to use a monotherapy alone. Again, amazing tech. They'll also be releasing their phase 3. They're running 2 phase 3 trials at the moment, but they'll be releasing that data around mid-2025.
Okay.
And again, that could be massive.
Yeah. So is that one intervention, 3 targets, each of the VEGF-A?
Yeah, so one disease indication, 3 targets, combination therapy. So
combination.
Yeah,
therapy.
So the standard of care, VEGF-A, so otherwise known as Lucentis, would be used in combination with Opthia's product.
Got it.
Which is super cool.
Yeah,
that's super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting when we when you're kind of infantilize the whole thing, you go, why don't we have a cure for this, that, and the next thing, or why don't we have a wonder drug for this? But the unfortunate reality is, like, biology is just so unbelievably complex that throwing one molecule or one antibody or one what have you at something, chances are isn't going to be enough. So more and more we're seeing combinations of X and Y, or X, Y, and Z, or X and Z, to actually have that synergistic effect. So I work in radiopharmaceuticals, and where a lot of what we're testing it's not going to be standalone, it's going to be in combination with something else. Especially in cancer, you see a lot of drugs are now being marketed in combination with X, Y, or Z. You know, it's not like there's not going to be one wonder drug. There's just like another tool in the toolkit for clinicians to prescribe to give to someone, and it's becoming more targeted as well, right? Like, you know, again, to infantilize the whole thing, it's like, well, the wonder drug can work on everything. Well, no, it can only work on probably a subset of the population based on, you know, various features, and it might be more efficacious in a certain subpopulation than it is in others, or it might be have more side effects in one subpopulation than others. So it's like a lot more complex, and I think we're going to see more and more companies working with combinations to find those synergistic effects, something off the shelf, bolted onto something innovative, and away you go.
Yeah, for sure. I guess a lot of sort of disease pathologies aren't really just binary, so you definitely do need like a multimodal approach, as you're saying, using different combinations and to sort of provide, you know, superior end result, you know.
Yeah. Have you heard of Amarok Therapeutics?
So I have heard of Amarok Therapeutics through your podcast, actually.
Oh, true. Yeah. So I'm not ashamed to say this, but I'm such a fan of theirs. I had Sarah Diermeyer on the podcast. I think she's maybe my third guest, which is very generous of her time. But that's interesting too, because like I'd never heard about long non-coding RNA before doing a little bit of background research on Amarok, and I'm really fascinated by these companies that are going after targets that are getting closer and closer to the human genome. You know, like traditional small molecules, they kind of float around in the cytosol or the bloodstream or whatever, you know, and then monoclonal antibodies are getting a bit closer. And then you've got, you know, small interfering RNAs that chop up mRNA or what have you. And then you're getting these other drugs that are getting closer and closer into the origin of where all this really happens, which is the human genome, right? In terms of like heritable genetic conditions. But even then, like I'm not sure if you get all that way there, you're going to have a one-hit wonder, right? Like who knows? With CRISPR, for example, you're chopping out segments of the genome, replacing it with something that should solve the problem, but we don't know the long-term implications of that. We know short-term implications,
sure,
but it's going to take 10, 15, 20 years for us to see what are the true downstream effects. And with long non-coding RNA, those are implicated in diseases that also have other pathogenetic pathways. You know, so maybe Amarok's drugs will be used in combination with other chemotherapeutic agents or immunotherapeutic agents. I think it's quite an exciting time. Like maybe, you know, in 15 years, there'll be like these cocktails for drugs that work amazingly because they're tacking on all these different technologies that have come out in the last, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely revisit this conversation then and sort of reminisce. But yeah, I mean, like...
when I'm 60 and how old will you be? You'll be in your 50s. I'll be all right.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, probably very much the same in terms of treating Alzheimer's, which is the biggest cookie that we haven't yet cracked, you know?
Yeah.
I think a disease which historically we've thought by removing tail plaques would sort of resolve the issue, but evidently it hasn't. So, yeah.
That's interesting, eh? Maybe those plaques weren't the problem. Maybe they were protective.
Well,
because those. So there's the amyloid plaques, there's the tau plaques, and Huntington's. It's the Huntington plaque. Like you got these three conditions that are kind of conserved evolutionarily in their presentation, like the accumulation of something that's sticky and tacky and gets in the way. Or at least that's what we thought. And then you try to blow those plaques up, but that doesn't work. So there's something else going on behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Didn't Roche spent like billions upon billions of dollars trying to develop something for, I think it was Alzheimer's, maybe it was...
I think a lot of biopharma companies, I mean, Biogen as well has an FDA-approved drug, which is a monoclonal antibody, which specifically targets tau plaques.
Yeah. I mean, that strategy made sense if the theory or the hypothesis was true, right?
Right.
Blow it up. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Problem solved. not problem solve.
Right, exactly. So there's clearly more to it than just removal of these plaques.
Yeah. Again, like biology is so complex.
It is,
So it's like
always evolving. We're always learning. Yeah.
I mean, at least it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Like, okay, that was a worthwhile endeavor to do, but clearly that's not the right approach. Back to the drawing board, figure it out. Oh, we've got new tools at our disposal now. Let's go at it again. Yeah, with more investors' money. But yeah, the cost side of things is always really fascinated me as well. Like when you consider the potential of getting a drug from, inception to market, 15 years and countless millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, just I was reading a paper the other day. I think it's about 1.7 billion so it's about 600 to 700 million just for the discovery phase. So that's, like your high throughput screening of different molecular compounds, and then finding like a lead compound to then non-clinically test in animals.
Yeah.
And then from that point onwards, sort of send through the phase 1 to phase 3. Yeah, 1.7 billion, which is
that's just nuts.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of people sort of give Big Pharma a bad rap. They think Big Pharma is just sitting on all this cash, when in reality, a lot of this cash is to sort of prop up their pipelines and to, I guess, service the patients, which is their ultimate goal.
And with treatments becoming more and more personalized, it's not like a broadcast approach where you've got like a cheaply made small molecule. All these big pharma companies were once chemical companies, so they had access to small molecules before anyone else because they had the tech to make them. But now it's way more targeted, it's way more complex. You've got biologics, you've got RNA technology, and you're targeting an increasingly smaller and smaller subpopulation. It's not everyone with osteoarthritis or everyone with macular degeneration. It's a subpopulation. It's not everyone with cystic fibrosis. It's these patients that have this involvement or this genetic defect.
Yeah.
So of course, like when you got more expensive manufacturing, very expensive research, small potential patient pool, the cost has to somehow justify all that work that you've done. So that's simply by virtue of that, you've got drug prices just skyrocketing, which is kind of scary, but it's justified, right? To a certain degree.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's probably some price gouging every now and then, but that's why we have,
Yeah. But I guess ultimately speaking, as long as this money goes back towards developing new drugs, that's what's most important.
Nice. So any other companies that you're looking at the moment?
Other companies. So Fennec Pharmaceuticals, another really cool company that have just gone commercial. I think they've been commercial for the past year and a half. They have a drug called sodium thiosulfate, and essentially what it's used as a prophylactic for in like pediatrics, essentially in kids who are receiving cisplatin-based chemotherapy. So historically speaking, so these kids who receive cisplatin-based chemotherapy are at risk of ototoxicity. So a byproduct of this form of chemotherapy is that something called reactive oxygen species, and essentially that just causes damage in their cochleas, and that has a whole lot of downstream implications in terms of sort of cognitive development when you lose your hearing at such a young age, and you're no longer able to communicate as effectively. So essentially what this company has introduced is their drug prevents or counteracts sort of the negative effects of cisplatin-based chemotherapies, which is, again, amazing.
Yeah.
A very much needed drug for like a, I guess, fairly common side effect.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
So you got like a treatment causing a really nasty side effect, and a pharmaceutical company coming in and saying, you know what, we've got something that could help with that. Yeah,
for sure.
Very cool.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Which I guess is what's highly incentivized now, is that because of sort of the technological leaps that we've made, a lot of sort of, I'd say, more common diseases are sort of like therapeutic indications that have quite a few sort of products for the patients have caused like a crowding effect almost. So it's almost beneficial for sort of these smaller biopharmaceuticals to find like these orphan indications where there are no treatments, and to service those patients and provide them with
like a proper unmet need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Standard of care.
Yeah, amazing. And like, there's actually a lot of incentive. Well, at least, regulatory authorities do provide an incentive to go after those so-called orphan indications.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if without it, coming back to the argument of how much it costs to do it and how many people you can sell to, there needs to be a trade-off. So it makes sense that there are some incentives to do drug development for an orphan indication, because you know that you're going to get to market quicker, or there are some cost-conserving mechanisms in place to ensure that you actually do provide a standard of care to meet an unmet need in a patient pool that is actually very small.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make commercial sense on its own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the FDA provide a lot of, as you said, they've got accelerated pathway to approval, and they also provide something for called a priority review voucher. So this
it's a weird word, voucher.
Yeah. So
here you go. Use it wisely.
Yeah. So these smaller companies can sell the voucher for, I think it's about 100 mil, and essentially, this voucher provides priority review of a molecular compound for whichever company chooses to use it. So, for these smaller companies, it's a means to sort of bring in cash and commercialize a product upon approval.
Yeah. I had no idea they could sell it. That's so.
Yeah.
So you could get a voucher.
Yeah,
you could sell it.
Yeah, priority review voucher.
And you could sell it to another pharmaceutical company.
Can sell it to another pharmaceutical company, and then they can apply it
to whatever drug, not necessarily an orphan drug.
Yeah.
That's sneaky, eh? But I mean, $100 million versus an extra 5 years, plus who knows how many millions of additional regulatory hurdle jumping. Yeah, makes sense.
Especially within these sort of disease indications where there's huge unmet need. I think it's,
Final question for you.
All right.
And a random question that I've asked the previous guest.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have an internal monologue or an internal dialogue or nothing? So do you have in your brain,
right?
Do you hear like a monologue happening in your brain, or do you hear a dialogue happening in your brain, or do you hear basically radio silence?
It just really depends on the situation.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so if you're sitting you're sitting at a park bench,
right.
Nice sunny day, nothing's bothering you, you haven't been, not stressed or anything. What's going on in your brain?
Right. Periods of silence. To be fair, when I get those moments, nothing. I mean, I guess we're in an industry which requires so much bandwidth in terms of thought and action that, when I get moments like that, I sort of relish in not having to think about anything.
That's really interesting, because I've asked that question to so many different people, and the only people that have answered in that manner are you and one of my brothers. Everyone else has said, when I'm sitting down, even if I'm totally relaxed and it's a super great day, there's just so much going on in my head. I can hear my voice. I can hear other people's voices. There's a conversation.
No.
Jackson hears countless, musical artists going over in his brain. So, there you go. So we're cut from the same cloth. There's nothing going on up here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's situational. It's definitely situational. Yeah.
Good stuff. Hey Cam, it's great to have you on, man.
Yeah, thanks.
And I look forward to see what you get up to in the next few years.
Sure.
Got a bright future, no doubt. But thanks again.
Thanks, Charles.